Welcome to Dreadtime Stories. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. Your choice to watch this channel means a lot to me. Tonight, I have a spine-chilling collection of scary stories set in the rain for you to enjoy. So, let's get comfortable and allow the darkness overtake us. It all started on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was browsing through Second Chances, our local thrift store, looking for a birthday gift for my niece Lily. That's when I saw her. Porcelain doll with curly blonde hair, frilly blue dress. She sat on a shelf, looking forlorn and out of place among the mismatched dishes and worn paperback. Something about the doll's sad blue eyes tugged at my heartstrings. Price tag read $5, a steal for what looked like an antique. Without much thought, I bought her, thinking Lily would love to add her to her doll collection. As the cashier rang up my purchase, she gave me an odd look. "Are you sure you want this one?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "She's been returned 3 times already." I laughed it off. "I'm sure it'll be fine. My niece loves fixing up old dolls." If only I had heeded that subtle warning. The trouble started that very night. I had placed the doll on my dresser, intending to clean her up before gifting her to Lily. Around 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by a soft, childlike giggle. My eyes snapped open, scanning the darkened room. There, in the moonlight streaming through my window, I saw the doll. She was sitting upright, her head turned towards me at an unnatural angle. I blinked hard, convinced I was dreaming. But when I opened my eyes, the doll was back in her original position. Unnerved but unwilling to admit anything strange had happened, I went back to sleep. The next morning, I found all the kitchen cabinets open, their contents strewn across the floor. Living alone, I had no one else to blame. Had I sleepwalked? As I cleaned up the mess, I noticed tiny footprints in the spilled flour. Footprints that looked like they belonged to a doll. Over the next few days, things escalated. I'd come home to find furniture rearranged, or wake up to the sound of my TV blaring static in the middle of the night. Each time, the doll seemed to be at the center of the disturbance, always in a different position than where I'd left her. I tried to get rid of her. I put her in the trash, only to find her back on my dresser the next morning. I drove her to a dumpster across town, but she reappeared in my backseat on the drive home. I even tried to burn her, but the matches would go out every time they got close to her porcelain skin. It was then that I noticed the name etched on the back of her neck. Penny. Desperate for answers, I returned to the thrift store. The same cashier was there, and when she saw me, face fell. "It's the doll, isn't it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She told me the doll's history, how it had belonged to a little girl named Penny in the 1950s. Penny had been a troubled child, prone to violent outbursts. One day she disappeared, and the doll was all that was left behind. Since then, anyone who owned the doll experienced terrifying phenomena. Armed with this knowledge, I was determined to end Penny's reign of terror. I researched exorcisms, cleansing rituals, anything that might help. But Penny was always one step ahead, as if she could read my thoughts. One night, things came to a head. I woke to find Penny sitting on my chest, her tiny porcelain hands wrapped around my throat. As I struggled to breathe, her painted lips moved, and I heard a child's voice, filled with malice. "You'll never get rid of me. I just want to play. Forever." In that moment of terror, I had an epiphany. Penny wasn't evil. She was lonely, a lost soul trapped in an eternal childhood. With the last of my strength, I gasped out, "Penny, I'm sorry you're alone, but this isn't the way to make friends." To my amazement, her grip loosened. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something other than malice in her painted eyes, sadness and a glimmer of hope. From that night on, I changed my approach. Instead of trying to get rid of Penny, I tried to understand her. I talked to her, read her stories, even set up tea parties. Gradually, the malevolent occurrences decreased. Penny still moved around the house, but now it seemed more playful than menacing. I learned to coexist with my supernatural housemate. I'd come home to find my laundry neatly folded, or wake up to the smell of coffee brewing. Penny's way of showing appreciation, I suppose. Years have passed since that rainy day in the thrift store. I never did give Penny to my niece. Instead, she's become a permanent fixture in my life. I've moved houses, changed jobs, even gotten married, and through it all, Penny has been there, a silent guardian with a mischievous streak. My wife, initially skeptical, has come to accept Penny's presence. We've even started to think of her as the child we haven't had yet. It's an unconventional family, to be sure, but it works for us. To anyone who might come across a seemingly innocent doll in a thrift store, remember Penny's story. Sometimes what we perceive as evil is simply misunderstood, and sometimes the most unlikely friendships can arise from the most terrifying beginnings. As for me, I've learned that compassion can overcome even the darkest of hauntings. Penny taught me that everyone, even a spirit trapped in a doll, needs understanding and love. Our home may be a bit more lively than most, but I wouldn't have it any other way. So if you ever visit us and see a blonde doll in a blue dress sitting on the mantel, don't be alarmed. That's just Penny, our resident ghostly child. Just be sure to say hello. She does so love to be included. It was my first year as principal of Oakwood Elementary. The school had a long history, having been built in the 1920s, and it showed its age in creaky floorboards and drafty hallways. But there was something else about the place, a heaviness that I couldn't quite explain. The first incident happened in late September. I was working late, the halls quiet and empty, when I heard what sounded like a child's laughter echoing from the second floor. Thinking a student had somehow been left behind, I hurried upstairs. The sound led me to room 205, but when I opened the door, the room was empty. As I stood there, confused, I felt a sudden chill. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I could have sworn I heard a whisper. "Help me!" I dismissed it as my imagination playing tricks on me, result of stress and too many late nights. The occurrences continued. Teachers reported strange happenings in room 205, books falling off shelves for no reason, chairs moving on their own, and the persistent feeling of being watched. Then came the dreams. Night after night, I found myself back in room 205, watching a scene unfold like an old movie. A young boy, no more than 8 years old, was crying in the corner. A shadowy figure loomed over him, angry words spilling from unseen lips. I would wake up in a cold sweat, the boy's terrified face burned into my mind. I knew I had to investigate. Digging through old school records, I discovered that in 1956, a student named Tommy Collins had died in what was ruled a tragic accident. He had fallen down the stairs near room 205, breaking his neck. The details were sparse, but something about it didn't sit right with me. As I delved deeper, strange things began happening around me. I would find old photographs on my desk, showing the school as it was in the 1950s. Doors would slam shut when there was no breeze. And always, there was that faint whisper, "Help me." I realized that Tommy's spirit was reaching out to me, trying to tell me something about his death. But why now, after all these years? The answer came in an unexpected way. We were renovating part of the school, and as workers were tearing down a wall in room 205, they made a chilling discovery. Hidden in the wall cavity was a small box containing a child's possessions, a baseball card, a toy soldier, and a crumpled piece of paper. With trembling hands, I unfolded the paper. It was a note written in a child's scrawl. "Mr. Harris hurt me. He said he'd hurt my mom if I told. I'm scared." Mr. Harris. The name rang a bell. Checking the old staff records, I found him, William Harris, a teacher who had worked at the school in the 1950s. He had left abruptly, just after Tommy's death. That night, Tommy's spirit appeared to me more clearly than ever before. He stood in the corner of my office, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "You found it," he said, his voice echoing as if from a great distance. "Now you know the truth." I nodded, my heart heavy with the weight of his words. "I'll make it right, Tommy, I promise." With the note as evidence, I went to the police. They reopened the case, and a thorough investigation revealed the dark truth. William Harris had been abusing students, and Tommy had threatened to expose him. In a panic, Harris had pushed Tommy down the stairs, staging it to look like an accident. As the truth came to light, I could feel a change in the school. The heaviness lifted, the strange occurrences ceased. And in room 205, where once there had been an oppressive chill, there was now a sense of peace. The night after Harris was finally brought to justice, old and frail, but still alive to face his crimes, I had one last dream. I was in room 205 again, but this time it was filled with warm, golden light. Tommy stood there, smiling, no longer the scared little boy, but a spirit at peace. "Thank you," he said simply, and then he was gone. The experience changed me profoundly. I realized that my role as principal went beyond paperwork and test scores. I was a protector, an advocate for the children in my care, both the living and those whose voices had been silenced long ago. We dedicated a memorial to Tommy in the school, ensuring that his story would never be forgotten. And though the ghostly happenings ceased, I never forgot the lessons Tommy taught me about listening to the whispers of the past and standing up for those who can't speak for themselves. To anyone who finds themselves in a position of responsibility over children, remember Tommy's story. Be vigilant, be compassionate, and always listen, even to the voices that others might dismiss as imagination or superstition. As for me, I continue my work at Oakwood Elementary with renewed purpose. And sometimes, when I walk past room 205, I feel a gentle warmth, as if Tommy is still there watching over the school and the children within it. His whispers may have faded, but the impact of his story lives on, a reminder that justice and truth can transcend even death itself. Rosewood Hall was a grand old mansion on the outskirts of town, popular for weddings and events. When I took the job as caretaker, I was more concerned with leaky roofs and creaky floorboards than spectral inhabitants. But all that changed on a chilly autumn evening. Just as I was locking up after a particularly lavish wedding, I heard it first. Faint strains of a wedding march echoing through the empty ballroom. Thinking someone had left a speaker on, I went to investigate. What I saw when I opened those ornate double doors will stay with me forever. There, in the moonlight streaming through the tall windows, was a young woman in a wedding gown. She was beautiful, with dark hair piled atop her head, adorned with pearls and lace. But she was also translucent, form shimmering like a mirage. As I stood there, frozen in disbelief, she turned to me. Her eyes were filled with such profound sadness that it made my heart ache. "Have you seen my William?" she asked, her voice a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Before I could respond, she vanished, leaving behind only the lingering scent of roses and a chill in the air. Shaken, I delved into the history of Rosewood Hall. I learned that in 1919, a young bride named Elizabeth Hartley had died on her wedding day. The details were vague, but rumors spoke of a jilted groom and a tragic accident. Over the next few months, I witnessed Elizabeth's ghost reliving her wedding day over and over, always searching for her William, always ending in heartbreak and disappearance. It was a cycle of hope and despair that seemed to have no end. Determined to help Elizabeth find peace, I began investigating her story in earnest. Pored over old newspapers, court records, and even tracked down descendants of guests who had attended the ill-fated wedding. Slowly, a clearer picture emerged. William hadn't jilted Elizabeth at all. He had been in an accident on his way to the ceremony, delayed but determined to reach his bride. Elizabeth, thinking she had been abandoned, fled to the tower in despair. In her distress, she had fallen to her death. But the tragedy didn't end there. William, arriving late and discovering what had happened, was overcome with grief. He took his own life that very night, unable to bear the thought of living without Elizabeth. Armed with this knowledge, I waited for Elizabeth's next appearance. When she materialized in the ballroom, I approached her gently. "Elizabeth," I said, my voice shaking, "I know what happened to William." Her ethereal form seemed to solidify slightly as she focused on me. "You do? Please, tell me." I recounted the true events of that day, watching as realization dawned in her spectral eyes. As I spoke, another figure began to materialize beside her, a young man in a wedding suit, eyes filled with love and regret. "William," Elizabeth cried, reaching out to him. Their hands met, and in that moment, they both became more solid, more real. They looked at each other with a love that had transcended death and a century of separation. William turned to me, his voice echoing with gratitude. "Thank you for uncovering the truth. We can finally be together." As I watched, Elizabeth and William began to dance, their forms slowly fading as the strains of a ghostly wedding march filled the air. With a final, radiant smile, they vanished completely, leaving behind only a sense of peace and the faint scent of roses. In the years that followed, Rosewood Hall changed. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and it became a truly joyful place for weddings. Sometimes late at night, I'd catch a glimpse of two figures waltzing in the moonlight, or hear the distant sound of laughter and music. This experience changed me profoundly. I realized that love truly can conquer all, even death itself, and I learned that sometimes the past doesn't need to be laid to rest. It needs to be understood and reconciled. To all the couples who come to Rosewood Hall to begin their lives together, I share a modified version of Elizabeth and William's story. I tell them about a love so strong it waited 100 years to be fulfilled. It serves as a reminder to cherish every moment, to never take their love for granted. As for me, I continue to care for Rosewood Hall, honored to be the guardian of not just a beautiful venue, but a place where two souls finally found their happy ending. And on quiet evenings, when the moon is full and the air is sweet with the scent of roses, I raise a glass to Elizabeth and William, the eternal bride and groom of Rosewood Hall. Their story taught me that true love never dies, that unfinished business can echo through time, and that sometimes all a restless spirit needs is for someone to uncover the truth and help them find their way home. So if you ever visit Rosewood Hall and feel a sudden chill or catch a whiff of roses when there are none in bloom, don't be afraid. It's just Elizabeth and William, eternally young, eternally in love, dancing their way through eternity in the place where they were meant to begin, there forever. It was a sweltering summer day when we finally finished moving in. My wife, Sarah, and our two children, Emma, 10, and Tyler, 8, were excited about the spacious old house with its creaky floorboards and ornate woodwork. I was just glad to have inherited a mortgage-free home in a good school district. As we unpacked, Emma came running down the stairs, her eyes wide with excitement. "Dad, we found a door to the attic. Can we explore it?" "Please." I hesitated. The attic hadn't been mentioned in the will or by the realtor. Seeing the eagerness in my children's eyes, I nodded. "All right, but be careful. Probably dusty and full of old junk." How wrong I was. As we climbed the narrow stairs, the air grew thick and heavy. The attic was vast, stretching the entire length of the house. Dust motes danced in the beams of light streaming through the small circular window. But it wasn't the size of the space that took our breath away. It was what filled it. The attic was crammed with objects of every description. Antique furniture, trunks overflowing with clothes, shelves lined with books and knickknacks. Each item seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly quality, as if it held secrets just waiting to be discovered. "Wow," breathed Tyler, reaching out to touch an old rocking horse. The moment his fingers made contact, the strangest thing happened. The air around us seemed to ripple, and suddenly we could hear the laughter of a young boy, see the faint outline of a child rocking back and forth. Sarah gasped, pulling Tyler back. The apparition didn't seem malevolent. It faded after a few moments, leaving us all stunned. What was that?" Emma whispered, a voice a mix of fear and awe. I shook my head, unable to explain what we just witnessed. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I think we should be careful about touching things up here." Over the next few weeks, we spent hours exploring the attic, uncovering the stories held within each object. We learned to approach them cautiously. Each touch could trigger a vivid memory or ghostly encounter. An old wedding dress showed us glimpses of a joyful ceremony from the 1920s. A tarnished pocket watch revealed the final moments of a soldier in World War I. A child's diary opened a window into the life of a young girl in the 1950s, her hopes and dreams echoing across time. At first, I tried to rationalize what was happening. Maybe the house was built on some kind of electromagnetic anomaly. Perhaps we were all suffering from some sort of shared hallucination. But as the experiences continued, I had to accept that something truly extraordinary was occurring. We discovered that the objects didn't just hold memories. They held the essence of the people they had belonged to. These weren't malevolent spirits or terrifying ghosts. They were echoes of lives lived, moments preserved, waiting for someone to remember them. As we delved deeper into the attic's secrets, we began to piece together our family history. Generations of Caldwells had lived in this house, their stories intertwining with the broader tapestry of history. We learned of triumphs and tragedies, loves lost and found, all preserved in this magical space. But it wasn't all peaceful discoveries. Some objects held darker memories. A mirror that showed flashes of a terrible argument, a knife that carried the weight of a long-ago crime. We learned to approach these items with caution, respecting the power they held. The attic began to change us. Emma, once shy and reserved, blossomed as she connected with the stories of strong women from our family's past. Tyler's struggle with reading improved dramatically after we found a collection of antique adventure novels, sparked his imagination. Sarah and I found ourselves growing closer as we unraveled the mysteries of our ancestors. We'd sit for hours in the attic, touching objects and sharing in the memories they revealed, gaining a deeper appreciation for the legacy we were a part of. As word spread about our unusual attic, we had to make a decision. Some suggested we turn it into a museum or use the antiques to make money, but we knew that would be a betrayal of the trust placed in us as caretakers of these memories. Instead, we decided to use our gift to help others. We carefully selected items to share with local historical societies, helping to fill in gaps in the town's records. We invited descendants of former house owners to visit, giving them a chance to connect with their own family history. One particularly memorable evening, we helped an elderly man find closure by allowing him to see his long-lost brother one last time through the memories held in an old baseball glove. The joy and peace on his face as he relived their childhood games was something I'll never forget. As the years passed, the attic became a sacred space for our family. We'd gather there on holidays, using the objects to remember and honor those who came before us. It became a tradition to bring important items from our own lives to the attic, adding our stories to the tapestry of memory. Now as I write this, I'm an old man. Emma and Tyler have grown up and have families of their own. They bring their children to the attic, teaching them about their heritage and the responsibility of being memory keepers. I've come to understand that we are all, in a way, living relics. We carry within us the stories and experiences of those who came before, shaping who we are and influencing the legacy we'll leave behind. To anyone who might discover their own haunted attic, whether it's a physical space filled with heirlooms or simply the stories passed down through generations, I urge you to approach it with reverence and an open heart. For in these echoes of the past, we can find wisdom, healing, and a deeper connection to the unbroken chain of human experience. As for me, I know that one day I too will become a memory held in some cherished object in this attic, and I take comfort in knowing that through it, I'll be able to share my story with future generations, my love for them, echoing through time in this magical space where memories never truly fade. I've been the keeper of Black Rock Lighthouse for over 30 years, but it wasn't until recently that I discovered I wasn't its only guardian. My name is Samuel Hawkins, and this is the story of how I came to share my watch with the ghost of a long-dead keeper. Black Rock Lighthouse stands on a jagged outcropping of rock, miles from the nearest shore. It's a solitary existence, but one I've always found peaceful. The rhythmic flash of the light, the crash of waves against the rocks, the cry of seagulls, these have been the soundtrack of my life for 3 decades. It was on a stormy night in late October when I first encountered him. The wind was howling, rain lashing against the windows of the lighthouse. I was making my nightly rounds, ensuring the light was burning bright to guide any ships that might be braving the tempest. As I climbed the spiral staircase to the lantern room, I felt a sudden chill. The air grew thick, as if I was moving through water rather than air. And then I saw him, figure standing by the great lens, his hand resting on the brass railing. He was translucent, his form shimmering like a mirage. He wore the uniform of a lighthouse keeper from a century past, his beard white and wild, his eyes fixed on the raging sea beyond. He stood frozen, my heart pounding. The ghost, or what else could he be, turned to me, his eyes filled with an otherworldly light. "A ship approaches," he said, his voice echoing as if from a great distance. "We must warn them." Before I could respond, he vanished. Shaken, I rushed to the window. Through the rain and mist, I could just make out the lights of a ship, dangerously close to the treacherous rocks that surrounded the lighthouse. Without thinking, I ran to the foghorn controls and sounded a warning. The ship veered away at the last moment, narrowly avoiding disaster. In the days that followed, I convinced myself it had been a hallucination brought on by too many years of solitude. But deep down, I knew what I had seen was real. It wasn't long before I saw him again. This time, it was a clear night, the sea calm and the stars bright. He appeared beside me as I stood on the gallery, looking out over the water. "I am Ezra Blackwood," he said, his ghostly form more solid than before. "I was the first keeper of this light." Over the next few hours, Ezra told me his story. He had died in a storm in 1876, swept off the rocks while trying to rescue shipwrecked sailors. But his spirit had remained, bound to the lighthouse by his sense of duty and his love for the sea. For over a century, he had been watching over ships, unable to interact with the living keepers who came and went. Until now. "You have a gift, Samuel," he told me. "You can see beyond the veil. Together we can save more lives." And so began our unusual partnership. Ezra's spectral senses could detect danger long before any modern equipment. He could feel the approach of storms, sense ships in distress, even predict rogue waves that could spell doom for unwary vessels. With his warnings and my ability to act in the physical world, we became an unbeatable team. Ships were guided safely through treacherous waters, lives were saved, and Black Rock Lighthouse gained a reputation as a beacon of safety in even the worst conditions. Of course, I couldn't tell anyone about Ezra. Who would believe that I was working alongside the ghost of a long-dead lighthouse keeper? But I didn't need recognition. The knowledge that we were saving lives was enough. As the years passed, Ezra became more than just a partner. He became a friend. We would spend long nights talking about the sea, sharing stories of the ships we'd seen and the storms we'd weathered. He told me of the changes he'd witnessed over the decades, the transition from sail to steam to modern engines. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were times when even our combined efforts weren't enough. I'll never forget the night we lost a fishing trawler to a sudden squall. Ezra took it hard, his spirit form fading almost to nothing in his grief. It took weeks before he regained his strength, but the experience only reinforced our determination to protect those who braved the seas. Now, as I approach retirement, I find myself worried. Who will see Ezra when I'm gone? Who will work with him to keep the ship safe? I've started to train my replacement, a young woman named Marie, hoping that she too might have the gift to see beyond the veil. To my relief and Ezra's joy, it seems she does. The first time she saw him, she didn't run or scream. Instead, she listened intently as he warned of an approaching storm. From that moment, I knew Black Rock's legacy of supernatural protection would continue. As I prepare to leave the lighthouse for the last time, I find myself filled with a mix of sadness and contentment. I'm leaving behind more than just a job. I'm leaving a friend, a partner, a shared mission that has defined my life for so long. But I also know that Ezra will continue his eternal watch, guiding ships to safety with the help of a new generation of keepers. And sometimes on stormy nights when the wind howls and the waves crash against my windows, I swear I can hear the distant sound of a foghorn, warning ships away from danger. To all the sailors out there, know this. When you see the beam of Black Rock Lighthouse cutting through the darkness, it's not just the light that's watching over you. There's a ghost at the tower, a tireless spirit who has made it his eternal mission to guide you safely home. And to Ezra, my friend, my partner, my ghostly guardian, thank you for sharing your watch with me. May your light never dim, and may you continue to be the unseen protector of all who sail these treacherous waters. It started on a crisp autumn afternoon. Sarah, an avid antique collector, had been scouring local estate sales for unique finds. She burst into our home, eyes shining with excitement, clutching a small velvet box. "Look what I found, David," she exclaimed, opening the box to reveal an ornate silver pendant. It was beautiful, I had to admit, with intricate engravings and a large deep blue stone at its center. but something about it made me uneasy. Sarah was enamored. She immediately put it on, admiring how it looked in the mirror. The woman at the sale said it was over 200 years old, she said, tracing the engravings with her finger. Isn't it exquisite? I nodded, trying to shake off my sense of foreboding. It's certainly unique, I replied, forcing a smile. That night, I woke to the sound of Sarah talking in her sleep. This wasn't unusual. She often mumbled incoherently during particularly vivid dreams. But this was different. She was speaking clearly in full sentences, but in a voice that wasn't quite her own. Help me, she whispered, her eyes still closed. I need to find her. I need to make it right. Alarmed, I gently shook her awake. Sarah blinked at me, confused. What's wrong? She asked, her voice back to normal. You were talking in your sleep, I explained. Something about needing help, needing to find someone. Sarah furrowed her brow. That's strange. I was having the most vivid dream. I was in an old house, searching for something. For someone. It felt so real. I glanced at the amulet, still hanging around her neck. It seemed to gleam in the moonlight, and I could have sworn I saw the blue stone pulse faintly. Over the next few days, Sarah's behavior began to change. She became obsessed with researching the history of the amulet, spending hours online and at the local library. She spoke of a woman named Elizabeth Blackwood, the amulet's original owner, who had lived in our town in the early 1800s. Sarah started having more vivid dreams, each one revealing more about Elizabeth's life. She would wake up with tears in her eyes, speaking of a lost love, a betrayal, and a desperate search for redemption. I grew increasingly worried. Sarah was losing weight, dark circles forming under her eyes from lack of sleep. She would sometimes zone out mid-conversation, her eyes glazing over as if she were seeing something far away. One night, I woke to find Sarah's side of the bed empty. Panicked, I searched the house, finally finding her in the attic, rummaging through old boxes. Sarah, what are you doing? I asked, approaching her cautiously. She turned to me, but her eyes were distant, unfocused. When she spoke, it was with the same strange voice I'd heard in her sleep. I must find the letters. They'll prove my innocence. I reached out to touch her, and the moment my hand made contact with her arm, I felt a jolt of energy. Suddenly, I wasn't in our attic anymore. I was standing in an old Victorian parlor, watching a scene unfold before me. A woman, Elizabeth, I assumed, was arguing with a man. Tears streamed down her face as she pleaded with him. You must believe me, Thomas. I never betrayed you. The letters will prove it. The vision faded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving me disoriented and shaken. Sarah blinked, coming back to herself. David? What happened? Why are we in the attic? I realized then that we were dealing with something beyond our understanding. The amulet wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a conduit, connecting Sarah to Elizabeth's spirit. Over the next few weeks, I joined Sarah in her research, determined to uncover the truth about Elizabeth Blackwood. We learned that she had been accused of infidelity by her fiancé, Thomas, and had died in disgrace, her name tarnished. The more we discovered, the stronger Sarah's connection to Elizabeth became. She would slip into trances, speaking as Elizabeth, revealing details about her life and the location of the letters that would prove her innocence. Following Elizabeth's guidance through Sarah, we eventually found a hidden compartment in an old desk, the local historical society. Inside were a bundle of letters, yellowed with age but still legible. They revealed the truth. Elizabeth had been framed by a jealous rival, and Thomas had died, never knowing the truth about his beloved's innocence. As Sarah read the last letter aloud, I felt a shift in the air. The amulet glowed brightly. For a moment, I saw the ghostly figure of a woman standing beside us, a peaceful smile on her face. Then, in a flash of light, she was gone. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to the amulet. It's old, she said, removing it from her neck. The blue stone, once vibrant and pulsing with energy, had turned dull and lifeless. We realized that Elizabeth's spirit had finally found peace. By uncovering the truth and clearing her name, we had helped her complete her unfinished business. In the days that followed, Sarah returned to her normal self. The dreams stopped, and the strange trances ceased. But we were both profoundly changed by the experience. We donated the letters to the Historical Society, ensuring that Elizabeth's true story would be known. The amulet, now just a beautiful antique, sits in a display case in our living room, a reminder of our brush with the supernatural. This experience taught me that the boundary between the world of the living and the dead is thinner than we imagine. It showed me the power of unresolved emotion, how they can echo through time, seeking resolution. To anyone who might come across an antique with a history, remember Elizabeth's amulet. Sometimes these objects carry more than just monetary value or aesthetic beauty. They can be bridges to the past, conduits for spirits seeking justice or peace. As for Sarah and me, we've developed a deeper appreciation for the mysteries of life and death. We continue to collect antiques, but now we approach each piece with reverence, wondering what stories or spirits they might hold. The amulet may have lost its supernatural power, but its impact on our lives remain. It opened our eyes to a world beyond our understanding, a world where love, guilt, and the quest for truth can transcend even death itself. I've been a long-haul trucker for over 20 years, and I thought I'd seen it all. But nothing could have prepared me for that fateful night on Route 13. My name is Mike Hawkins, and this is the story of my encounter with the Phantom Hitchhiker. It was a cold, rainy night in late October. I was driving my usual route from Chicago to Detroit, a kind of monotonous journey I could do in my sleep. The rain was coming down in sheets, visibility was poor, Ruth's K, and I was looking forward to reaching the truck stop where I planned to catch a few hours of shut-eye. As I rounded a bend, my headlights caught a figure standing on the side of the road. It was a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, with long dark hair plastered to her face by the rain. She was wearing a white dress that seemed oddly out of place for the weather and location. Now, I'm not in the habit of picking up hitchhikers. It's too risky in this day and age. But something about this girl made me pull over. Maybe it was the desperation in her eyes, or the fact that she looked so out of place on this deserted stretch of highway. Whatever it was, I found myself opening the passenger door. "Where you headed?" I asked as she climbed in. "Millbrook," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's about 30 miles up the road." I nodded, putting the truck in gear. As we drove, I tried to make conversation, but she was eerily quiet. When I glanced over, I noticed she was shivering, so I turned up the heat. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to break the silence. "Sarah," she said, still staring straight ahead. "Sarah Winters." Something about the way she said it sent a chill down my spine. I focused on the road, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that was creeping over me. As we approached Millbrook, Sarah finally spoke again. "Could you drop me off at the old cemetery on Oak Street?" It was an odd request, but I figured maybe she had family there or something. I agreed, and a few minutes later, we pulled up to the wrought iron gates of the cemetery. "Thanks for the ride," Sarah said, her hand on the door handle. Then she turned to me, and in the glow of the dashboard lights, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Her eyes were completely black, like empty sockets. Before I could react, she vanished. 1 second she was there, and the next, nothing, just an empty seat and the lingering scent of rain and something else, something old and musty like dried flowers. My heart was pounding as I sat there, trying to make sense of what had just happened. That's when I noticed something on the seat where Sarah had been sitting. It was a small, folded piece of paper. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was a message written in faded, spidery handwriting. "Beware the curve at Miller's Creek. Death awaits those who don't heed the warning." I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the note. Miller's Creek was about 10 miles ahead, notorious for its sharp bend that had claimed more than a few lives over the years. Finally, I pulled myself together and decided to continue my journey. But as I approached Miller's Creek, the words of the note kept echoing in my mind. At the last moment, I decided to pull over and wait out the rain. It was a decision that saved my life. Not 5 minutes later, I heard the screech of tires and the sickening crunch of metal. Another truck, trying to navigate the curve in the rain, had jackknifed and gone off the road, right where I would have been if I hadn't stopped. As I called 911 and waited for help to arrive, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. Phantom Hitchhiker, Sarah, saved my life. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the experience. I researched the area and discovered that 50 years ago, a young woman named Sarah Winters had died in a car accident at that very curve. She had been on her way to her wedding, which explained the white dress. Since then, there had been numerous reports of a young woman in white hitchhiking along that stretch of Route 13, always disappearing after warning drivers about the dangerous curve. That night changed me profoundly. I became more cautious on the road, more aware of the thin line between life and death. I also developed a deep respect for the mysteries of the world that can't be explained by logic or reason. I've driven Route 13 many times since then, always slowing down at Miller's Creek, always keeping an eye out for a girl in a white dress. I've never seen Sarah again. Sometimes, when the night is dark and the rain is falling, I catch a whiff of that musty floral scent in my truck. To all the drivers out there, remember this: not all hitchhikers are looking for a ride. Sometimes, they're trying to deliver a message. And if you ever find yourself on Route 13 on a rainy night, and you see a young woman in a white dress, don't be afraid to stop. She might just be your guardian angel for the night. As for me, I'll always be grateful to the phantom hitchhiker, Route 13. Her chilling message didn't just save my life that night. It reminded me that there are forces in this world beyond our understanding, and sometimes, the boundary between the living and the dead is thinner than we think. So the next time you're on a lonely road and you feel a chill that can't be explained by the weather, remember Sarah Winters and her final act of kindness. And always, always, drive safely. It all started when I inherited my uncle's house on the edge of Millbrook Park. I was reluctant to return, but with my life in the city falling apart, it seemed like the perfect opportunity for a fresh start. Little did I know that coming back would force me to face the dark mystery that had loomed over Millbrook since I was a kid. The park had always been a source of whispered rumors and fearful glances. Back in 1985, 5 children had disappeared without a trace while playing there after school. Despite extensive searches and investigations, they were never found. The case went cold, but the town never forgot. My first night back, I couldn't sleep. The old house creaked and groaned, but it wasn't the unfamiliar sounds keeping me awake. It was the laughter, faint, distant, but unmistakably the sound of children playing. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind or my imagination, but deep down, I knew better. The next day, I visited the park. It was a sorry sight. Playground equipment rusted and broken, grass overgrown. As I stood there, memories came flooding back. I had been friends with one of the missing children, a boy named Tommy. We were supposed to meet at the park that fateful day, but I had been sick and stayed home. That twist of fate had saved me from whatever horror had befallen the others. As I walked through the abandoned playground, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn breeze. The swings creaked gently, though there was no wind. And there, just at the edge of my hearing, was that laughter again. Determined to uncover the truth, I threw myself into researching the disappearances. I spent days in the local library, poring over old newspapers and town records. I tracked down retired police officers who had worked the case and families who had lived in Millbrook back then. But the more I dug, the more questions I had. There were inconsistencies in the official reports, witnesses whose statements had been dismissed, and strange occurrences that had been swept under the rug. As weeks passed, paranormal activity in the park intensified. The laughter became clearer, often accompanied by the sound of running footsteps and children calling out to each other. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I'd catch glimpses of shadowy figures darting between the trees. One evening, as twilight settled over the park, I saw something that chilled me to my core. 5 spectral figures, clearly children, playing on the broken-down equipment. They were translucent, with an otherworldly glow about them. As I watched, frozen in shock, one of them turned and looked directly at me. It was Tommy. "Ja," called, his voice echoing as if from a great distance. "You came back. We've been waiting for so long." I wanted to run, to hide from this impossible sight, but I knew I couldn't abandon Tommy and the others again. Swallowing my fear, I approached. The ghostly children gathered around me, their faces a mixture of joy and sorrow. They told me their story, how they had been lured into the woods by a stranger who promised them candy and toys, how they had been trapped, scared, and alone until their lives were cruelly cut short. But their spirits couldn't rest. They were bound to the park, reliving their last happy moments before the tragedy, waiting for someone to uncover the truth and bring their killer to justice. Armed with this knowledge, I redoubled my efforts to solve the case. I worked with a retired detective who had never given up on finding answers. Together, we pieced together clues that had been overlooked, followed leads that had been abandoned. Our investigation led us to a man named Frank Pearson, who had worked as a groundskeeper in the park back in 1985. He had been questioned at the time, but cleared of suspicion. However, new evidence pointed to his involvement. As we closed in on Pearson, paranormal activity in the park reached a fever pitch. The children's laughter turned to urgent cries, pushing us to hurry, to finally end their long wait for justice. In a dramatic confrontation, Pearson confessed to the murders. The evidence we had gathered, combined with his confession, was enough to bring closure to the decades-old case. The children's remains were finally recovered and given proper burials. The night after Pearson's arrest, I visited the park one last time. The air was different, lighter, peaceful. The 5 ghostly children appeared, but this time they were smiling, their forms already beginning to fade. "Thank you, Jack," Tommy said, his voice filled with relief. "We can rest now." As I watched, they joined hands and slowly vanished, their laughter echoing one last time before fading into silence. In the years that followed, I worked to restore the park, transforming it from a place of tragedy to a vibrant space where children could play safely. A memorial was erected, ensuring that Tommy and his friends would never be forgotten. The echoing laughter that once haunted the playground was replaced by the genuine joy of living children. But on quiet evenings, when the light is just right, I sometimes catch a glimpse of 5 spectral figures playing happily among the new equipment, finally at peace. This experience taught me that the past never truly dies, that unresolved tragedies can echo through time until someone is willing to listen and act. It showed me the power of perseverance, facing our deepest fears to bring justice and closure. To anyone who hears laughter where there should be none, or feels the weight of unresolved history, don't turn away. Sometimes the voices from the past are calling out for help, for understanding, for someone brave enough to uncover long-buried truths. As for me, I remain in Millbrook, watching over the park and the memory of 5 children whose laughter once echoed in the twilight. Their story, and the lessons it taught me about courage, justice, and the enduring power of the human spirit, will stay with me always. It was a crisp autumn evening when I first saw the rusted gates of Starlight Carnival looming in the distance. I had heard rumors about an abandoned amusement park deep in the woods, but I never expected to actually find it. Faded sign, barely legible, creaked in the wind as I approached. With my camera in hand, I slipped through a gap in the fence. The eerie silence was broken only by the occasional groan of metal and the crunch of dead leaves beneath my feet. Dilapidated rides stood like skeletal remains of a bygone era. Ferris wheel frozen in time, a merry-go-round with peeling paint and broken mirrors. As I wandered deeper into the carnival grounds, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Shadows seemed to flicker at the edge of my vision, always disappearing when I turned to look. I dismissed it as nerves, focusing instead on capturing the haunting beauty of the decaying attraction. It wasn't until I reached the big top that things took a turn for the surreal. The once vibrant tent was now a faded patchwork of tears and mildew. As I lifted my camera to take a shot, I heard it. Faint strains of carnival music drifting on the wind. Curious and slightly unnerved, I pushed aside the heavy canvas flap, stepped inside. What I saw defied all logic and reason. The interior of the tent was immaculate, as if time had never touched it. Bright lights illuminated a sawdust-covered ring, and the stands were filled with shadowy figures. Before I could process what I was seeing, a spotlight blazed to life, and a figure appeared in the center ring. It was a man dressed in an old-fashioned ringmaster's outfit, his face pale and gaunt. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice echoing unnaturally, Welcome to the final performance of Starlight Carnival. What followed was a spectacle both beautiful and terrifying. Acrobats soared through the air, their translucent forms leaving trails of ghostly light. A lion tamer cracked his whip at big cats that flickered in and out of existence. Clowns cavorted with a manic energy that sent chills down my spine. Each act was more incredible than the last. There was an undercurrent of tragedy to every performance. The trapeze artist's routine ended with a sickening crunch as she hit the ground, only to rise and begin again. The lion tamer was mauled repeatedly, his screams of agony turning to laughter as he stood up unharmed. I wanted to run, to close my eyes, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to look away from the macabre show unfolding before me. As I watched, I began to understand. These were the spirits of performers who had died here, trapped in an eternal cycle of reliving their final moment. The ringmaster appeared beside me, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. It's been so long since we had a live audience that his voice sending shivers down my spine. Won't you join us? The show must go on after all. I felt a pull, as if invisible hands were trying to drag me into the ring. With every ounce of willpower I possessed, I tore myself away, stumbling out of the tent and into the cool night air. As I ran through the carnival grounds, the once silent attractions sprang to life around me. Ghostly children laughed on the merry-go-round, spectral couples floated in the tunnel of love, and the Ferris wheel creaked as it began to turn. I didn't stop running until I was well beyond the rusted gates. As I turned to look back, panting, I saw the carnival lights flicker and die, plunging the grounds back into darkness. The music faded, leaving only the sound of the wind in the trees. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself it had all been a vivid hallucination, but the photos on my camera told a different story. Amid the shots of decaying rides and overgrown paths were images that shouldn't have been possible. The blur of an acrobat in mid-flight, the faint outline of the ringmaster, the shadowy audience in the big top. I've never gone back to Starlight Carnival, but I know it's still out there, waiting in the woods. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I swear I can hear the distant strains of carnival music carried on the breeze. This experience changed me profoundly. It taught me that there are things in this world that defy explanation, that the line between the living and the dead is thinner than we imagine. I've since dedicated my work to documenting other abandoned places, always wondering if I'll encounter another ghostly audience waiting for their final show. To anyone who might stumble upon an abandoned carnival in the woods, beware. Performers of Starlight are always looking for new acts to join their eternal show. And if you hear music drifting through the trees, turn back. For once the show begins, it never truly ends. As for me, I'll always carry the memory of that night with me. The hauntingly beautiful and terrifying performances, the tragic spirits trapped in their final moments, and the realization that sometimes the most chilling stories are the ones that refuse to end. So if you're ever exploring an abandoned place and feel a chill run down your spine, remember the Starlight Carnival. Not all ghosts are content to rest in peace. Some are destined to perform for eternity, forever seeking an audience for their last tragic show. It was a dreary Tuesday afternoon when Mrs. Ellington brought the music box into my shop. It was a beautiful piece, crafted of rich mahogany with intricate gold inlay. She explained that it had belonged to her great-aunt Amelia, who had passed away decades ago. It hasn't worked in years, Mrs. Ellington said, a hint of sadness in her voice. But I can't bear to throw it away. Perhaps you can restore it? I agreed to take a look, fascinated by the craftsmanship. After Mrs. Ellington left, I carefully opened the box. Inside, I found a delicate mechanism, tarnished with age but still intact. As I tinkered with it, my fingers accidentally brushed against the winding key. The room filled with the sweetest melody I'd ever heard. It was a haunting tune, filled with both joy and sorrow. As the last notes faded, I felt a chill run down my spine. The air in the shop seemed to thicken, and I could have sworn I heard a faint whisper. That night, I couldn't get the melody out of my head. It played on repeat in my dreams, accompanied by fleeting images of a young woman in Victorian dress, face always just out of focus. The next morning, I returned to the shop early, drawn to the music box. As I approached it, I noticed something strange. Tarnish that had covered the mechanism was gone, metal gleaming as if newly polished. Curious, I wound the key again. The melody began. This time, something extraordinary happened. As the music played, a figure began to materialize before me. It was the woman from my dreams, now in full, spectral form. She was beautiful, long, dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of stories. She smiled at me, her voice echoing as if from a great distance. "Thank you for bringing my music back to life." I stood there, frozen in disbelief. Who are you?" I managed to stammer. "Amelia," she replied. "This was my music box. Each time it plays, I can return to this world for a short while." Over the next few weeks, I found myself winding the music box every day, eager to speak with Amelia. She told me of her life in the late 1800s, of her dreams and disappointments, her joys and sorrows. The music box had been a gift from her true love, a man she was forbidden to marry due to class difference. This melody was our secret language, she explained. When we couldn't be together, I would play it and feel close to him. As I listened to Amelia's stories, I felt myself falling in love, not just with her, but with the era she represented. Through her eyes, history came alive in a way no antique ever could. But our encounters were not without consequence. I began to neglect my work, spending hours lost in conversation with Amelia. My friends worried about my increasing isolation, and I couldn't shake the feeling that each time Amelia appeared, she became more solid, more present, while I felt increasingly drained. One day, as the melody played and Amelia materialized, I noticed something alarming. I could see the shelves of my shop through my own hand. I was becoming translucent, fading as Amelia grew more corporeal. Amelia noticed too, her eyes widening in horror. "Daniel," she gasped, I think I'm stealing your life force. The music box, it's not just bringing me back, it's trying to replace you with me." The realization hit me hard. Each time I wound the music box, I was pulling Amelia into the present, but at the cost of my own existence. We were trapped in a tragic exchange. Her return to life meant my fade into the spirit world. Tears in her eyes, Amelia made a difficult decision. "You must destroy the music box," she said. "The only way to break this cycle." My heart ached at the thought. "But I'll lose you," I protested. She smiled sadly. "You've given me a precious gift, Daniel. The chance to share my story, to be heard and remembered. But your life is worth more than my memories." With trembling hands, I picked up a hammer. Amelia nodded encouragingly, even as her form began to flicker. As the melody played one last time, I brought the hammer down on the delicate mechanism. The music stopped abruptly. Amelia's figure wavered, but before she disappeared, she leaned forward and kissed me gently. "Thank you," she whispered, "for letting me live again, if only for a little while." Then she was gone. In the days that followed, I struggled to come to terms with what had happened. Part of me mourned the loss of Amelia and the connection to the past she had represented. But I also felt a renewed appreciation for the present, for the life I had nearly lost. I still keep the broken pieces of the music box as a reminder of my extraordinary experience. Sometimes late at night, I swear I can hear the faint echoes of that haunting melody, and in those moments, I smile, remembering Amelia and the lessons she taught me about love, sacrifice, and the power of memory. To anyone who might come across an antique music box, remember this. Sometimes the most valuable things we possess are not the objects themselves, but the stories they carry. And sometimes those stories can come to life in ways we never imagined. As for me, I continue my work as an antique dealer, but with a newfound respect for the histories behind each piece. And I always listen carefully when winding old music boxes, just in case there's another spirit waiting to share its tale. We hope you enjoyed this chilling tale. If it sent shivers down your spine, give us a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. What was your favorite part? Don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling stories and hit that notification bell so you never miss a scare. Until next time, stay spooky and remember, sometimes the darkest shadows hide the most terrifying secret.